doing this. So how did you navigate the World Wide Web back in the day? Does anyone know? Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously URLs, but they started to organize things like in catalogs.
Okay.
So you can see like lists of things.
Yep.
But then like obviously started to outgrow catalogs because that used to make lists.
Yeah. So catalogs or
Directories
is what they're called. And so, you've probably heard of some of these, namely Yahoo started out as a directory. And all it was, you'd go through and say, this is my website, this is my URL, and this is what I do. It's pretty straightforward, not that interesting. They still exist today. They do serve a purpose, but they're not all that relevant anymore. And so as that grew, it became less and less useful to have these directories because how am I going to index 10 million websites in a single directory? So the search engines evolved. The first one was Archie. I was going to ask you that. Anyway, so the first one was called Archie, and it came out in 1990. And what it was is a way to kind of systematically catalog these directories. So you'd put in something and it would spit out what it thought was the answer. It was very basic, didn't have any sort of intelligence to it in the way that a search engine today does. This was Archie, screenshot of Archie. This will all make sense, so just bear with me if you're going, I don't care about this. So what? Between 1990 and 2000, there was an explosion of search engines. Everyone said, well, I can do this a better way. And so you had all these different search engines that would do things different. Between 93 and 99 in Wikipedia, there were 29 different major search engines I'd heard of. I'm guessing at some point some of you have used these back in the day. Yeah, some of these are pretty old. So what? Well, in business, predominantly in marketing, the money follows the masses because all marketing is about is getting in front of your target audience. How can you do that in large groups of people? So what's happening this weekend? I think. Okay. So yeah, the Super Bowl is happening. Does anyone know how much a 30-second spot in the Super Bowl costs this year? Okay, anyone else?
A 30-second spot.
30-second spot is $5 million, which works out to $170,000 a second. I didn't actually do the math. I just read that. But
I said that too.
If anyone's watched Dodgeball, when I was thinking about this, I'm like, have you ever seen $5 million? There's a scene where he pulls out. Have you ever seen $50,000? Pulls out this briefcase and this big reveal, and there's just that in there. So $5 million. Why does it cost $5 million? Okay, yes, economics, because someone will pay for it. So there's that aspect. But why are people willing to pay for it?
There's like 20 million people watching.
Yeah, it's a huge audience, but it's also, there are certain characteristics that they all share. So I know my audience pretty well, so I can target to them. So when you're looking at things from a marketing perspective, that's where cost comes in. And so the money will follow where there are lots of people, which is what we have here with SEO. That's why SEO is important because, you can look at it on its like kind of foundation and it's just, I write some words and I do some things to a website and that's kind of it. But SEO is a huge industry because of the possibilities that it has. So this is a graph that shows from basically the inception of Google back in 1999 to 2012, the growth in search traffic.
I have a question. Why do you think that's going up? Like what would be some factors that would influence that?
I think it's the searching engine is getting more optimized. It's more accurate. People are getting more access to internet.
Okay, for sure.
All the devices, you can search whenever.
Okay.
Yep.
One facet of that you may or may not have thought about that actually in the industry was a really big deal is you have voice search. So people ask questions more. And Google about a year and a half ago, I may be making that up, it's about a year ago, redid their algorithm altogether to better deal with voice search because they know it's going to be so important. If you look around, you have Siri, you have whatever Google's thing is, you have Cortana, and you have Amazon Echo. I mean, this is starting to proliferate, and so voice search is becoming really important. Were there any other answers you were looking for? Okay. And so it's interesting if you think about what Google does. So Google provides answers, right? But that's not actually their business. Google makes billions and billions of dollars every quarter off of paid ads. And so, again, Google exists to drive traffic. And now that they have captive all this traffic, they can make tons of money off of it because they can sell advertising space. So that's an important thing to think about when you're kind of considering this whole thing. All of it is about driving attention, getting people. What can I do? If I'm a blog, how can I drive traffic to my site so that I have advertisers that are willing to spend money with me because they know that they have an audience? That's kind of what it all boils down to, not tactically, but strategically. So, what does a search engine do? I watched Dodgeball like a week ago. That's the reason why. My wife didn't really appreciate it. So what does a search engine do? Yes.
It crawls your site, gets what your site is about, and then returns that as something for those terms.
Okay. Yes. Boil that down. What does a search engine provide?
Results.
Try again. You're right there. A search engine provides information. That's what they're trying to do. So you jumped ahead a little bit there, but so they're indexing and crawling, trying to gather information in order to return results, because that's what you're looking for. So who uses anything but Google? What do you use? Okay, I thought that was going to be your answer. At first I was going to be a little disappointed if you said Bing, and I said, nah, he's going to say DuckDuckGo. Okay, so why does everyone use Google?
The best search engine.
Okay, why is it the best search engine, though?
Because they can pull up a lot of information, and I mean meaningful information that you are looking for in such a short period of time.
Okay,
They tell us they're the best.
that certainly.
I have an Android phone, so I could use the voice feature, and it's way easier for me because I could have a plug-in, do some things, use the voice feature, and I get results, and I don't have to type it in and do a bunch of other stuff.
You don't have Android on your computer. What's your logic for using Google on your computer?
Got used to it.
Okay,
That's fair.
that's, yeah.
Can I ask that question? Google, is Google actually the best search engine, or is it just the best at marketing the search engine?
That depends upon your point of view. The gentleman in the back that uses DuckDuckGo probably has some concerns about privacy. One of the things that Google does, and part of why they are who they are, is because they collect information, and then they leverage that information to advertisers or marketers like ourselves in exchange for money.
And the government.
And the government.
So, and to answer your question, search engines, if we actually go back a couple slides to that list of all the different search engines, they all had different specialties. Like Metacrawler was one. They specialized in rankings based off of meta tags. And so search engines have different focuses. Google certainly has the most money of all of them, and generally probably does have the best results. So, that's part of the reason why they're number one.
I think that ultimately comes down to, maybe I would ask you, why don't you use Bing, or why don't you use Yahoo?
I'm in the Google environment.
Okay.
And so, all my searches are synced and
Okay.
everything.
Okay.
What about, will you answer that question for me? Why don't you use?
Yeah, so I was using Bing for a while, but I found that the results for very technical type of information, so when I'm doing like for developing and stuff like that, and for when I'm working on computers and things like that, for technical things, I found better results through Google than I did. But if I was searching for general, about the city, about nightlife type stuff, whatever, maybe Bing might have been
The easy results are, and so what that comes down to is Google invests a lot, and we'll talk about it more as we go on, but into artificial intelligence and into understanding what you're actually looking for. And that's part of the reason why Google's so successful at that, because Google's better understanding both your intent and what's actually said on a web page.
But ultimately, what I'm driving at is user experience, and I attended a conference a number of years ago where someone was talking about how Google is basically a giant referral machine, and so when you do a search, they are referring, a partner, if you will, a website to you when you do a search. And if you're satisfied with your search results, if you are looking to do a specific task or get specific information, Google would I think people would generally agree that Google gives you the best experience and gives you the most useful information, helps you to complete your task or whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so Google is able to effectively take they work well because they give you the best experience. That's why they're as big as they are.
Well,
Because they give you the best experience.
And that's what it boils down to. If you went to Google, I mean, like you were saying, if you were going to Bing and you weren't getting the answers you're looking for, you switched. And so that's Google's job, is there to provide the best information they can. So I'm going to keep going. So just think about that. That's Google's job. And so everything they do, specifically in, let's call it fighting people like me, trying to figure out what people like me are trying to do and get around it so that they can ensure that they're really presenting the best results. That's what their goal is. They're trying to make sure that they are not showing anything that's been manipulated, but is actually the right answer to your question. And as we get into how Google works, that'll make more sense. So there are two things that Google does. We've talked about this, so we'll just move through it quickly. They crawl the entire website. So they have servers that are pushing out for requests and going through every website that's out there. They'll crawl your website once a month. Just kind of an average website, I'll get crawled every, say, 28 days. If I'm CNN, I'm getting crawled every 30 seconds, just looking for new information. And so they're constantly looking through the web. They'll, back years ago, before they changed how things would happen, they would index the entire web in about 30 days. Now it's about 14 days that they can go through and do the entire web. And so they do have limited resources, so they segment people out into groups of, I'm going to crawl you frequently. You're from 2009. I'm not even going to look at you anymore. I'll check you like next year. There are things you can do to tell Google to come look at you if you do update that old website, but that's what they're doing. So they're going through and they're crawling it, they're understanding it, and then they're indexing it. So they're writing you into an index with certain variables and parameters associated with it that they can then refer to try and show you results quickly. Yeah.
If someone's purchased a domain but they haven't posted a site yet, like is that something where Google like checks the domain every once in a while, or is it just when content goes live?
Yeah, so usually there's a couple of primary ways that Google's going to find your website. So any CMS that you use, like WordPress or Drupal or Joomla or whatever you're using, will automatically ping the search engines and say I have new content. Anytime Google crawls another website and sees a link, they're going to follow the link to your website, and then they'll crawl your website if they haven't crawled it recently. But just a domain name registration isn't going to be anything. There's really no way for them to find that. And so
I would say plus Google, I mean, it's machines crawling the websites, and so they're primarily reading HTML. And so if there's no HTML at your domain, there's nothing for them to index.
And so, you probably more than most people will have heard of, there's different types of the web. So like you have the top level web, then you have the dark web, and you have the deep web. I'm probably going to get this wrong. So you have like Tor, that's basically the totally unindexed web that is only accessible through certain browsers. For the sake of this, we're going to call that the deep web, which can also be things that are like behind gates, or like customer portals and things like that crawlers can't get into. You also have the dark web, where there's just a lot of things out there that just haven't been indexed. So Google has its top level indexation that most of us are going to use, but then there's a whole there's tons of content out there that no one's ever seen. There's a cool search engine out there called A Million Less. It's actually kind of a fun SEO tool. You can go to it and it'll just remove the first million search results from any query, and you'll see all these all these websites that never get any traffic. We can talk after if you want to know why we would do that. So, anyway, are there any questions about this as to how that works? Again, I would assume the concept of a crawler and an index is at least somewhat familiar to you all. Okay. Yeah, I was a little worried I'd get up here and you'd be like, yeah, we know all that, idiot. Just tell us something new. So if there's anything I'm just harping on that you already know, just raise your hand and I'll move on. Okay, so what is an SEO's job? I try and manipulate the search results in order to get my clients to show up for whatever we're working on. But kind of. I mean, so when I say manipulation, it has a pretty negative connotation to it. Let's see, what's next? Yeah, I'm manipulating stuff. So, okay, this will explain the manipulation a little bit better. So if you think back to the directories and to the early search engines, it was very easy to manipulate them. So meta crawler, for instance, I talked about. There are things on a website called meta tags. Like a meta keywords tag used to be the big one, is what meta crawler looks at. I could just put in Provo car dealer like 800 times in that tag, and the crawler would go and say, oh, this person talks about Provo car dealer 80 times more than this other website, so they're more relevant, so let's show them. That's like the good old days of SEO, where there was really very little talent required, where you could just use a computer and manipulate everything. So search engines were pretty simple. I figured that was a non-offensive picture of someone looking simple. Of Keanu Reeves. Anyway, so text stuffing was an example. Because I didn't really want to go build a website to show this. I just took, this is a Wikipedia entry for Radical Dreams, which was like yesterday's featured entry. And using the console inspector, I just changed all of the text color for anything inside of the P tag. And so you'll notice everything here is white, which if I'm a user, all I'm going to see is Chrono series and 8 megabyte memory pack and ROM hackers. So it doesn't necessarily, if you're thinking about this in terms of a website, I could have a ton of content in white and it wouldn't impact my user experience. But if I'm a search engine, I still see all that content. So it used to be a way that I could manipulate search results for my favor, because I could just stuff whatever I wanted to talk about in there 1,000 times and no user would ever see it. So we call this black hat SEO, and I don't even know if this qualifies for black hat anymore because it just doesn't work. But it's just basically things that are just straight manipulation that offer no real good, no service, no information, nothing, are strictly done for the sake of manipulation. So that's what it used to be back in the day. This is an example of the meta keywords tag, where I could just put in 80 different phrases that I wanted to show up for and that would work. That's not SEO. And so I don't know what concept you guys have of SEO. If that's it, that's not what SEO is. That may have worked 10 years ago, 7 years ago or so, but the search engines have got a lot smarter than that. So there's two major components to SEO. You have your on-site, oh, there's a laser on this, huh? So you have your on-site component, which is basically what is my website saying? And you have your off-site component, which is what is everyone else saying? So think back to what the purpose of a search engine is, which is deliver information. I think I heard that. Yes. So I'm trying to deliver information. So if you think about, why is the reason you go online? For the most part, you're going online to look something up, to read something, to learn something. So there has to be information in order to do anything. And that's what makes everything go round. So what is your website actually saying? And then what are other websites saying about you? So I'm going to tap out for a minute and let you talk about some of these.
Okay, so on-site is, you can see here, structured data, and something that we talk about as NAP is name, address, phone number. That a company is going to have multiple web properties typically. So for example, if you have a website, you're going to have, probably a contact us page, something to that effect. And it's going to have this information so that someone can stop by, someone can send a package back to you, or someone can call you, email, whatever. But then you're also going to have like a Google My Business account, the type of results that show up in a location-sensitive search. So if I say Provo car dealer, and you see Larry H. Miller Chevrolet just down the street, that's a web property, and you want consistency there. That way, Google knows that you're the same business. Otherwise,
so on that, I thought structured might be actually something interesting for you guys to learn about. Do you use structured data, structured markup in anything that you guys do? I don't really know if that's
Probably not.
okay. So
Are you talking about like schemas?
yeah.
yeah,
That Google puts out?
yeah. So schema is a specific type of structured markup language.
Yeah.
So I thought just kind of on the more tech side of things, this might be a little more interesting. So this is something called schema.org. And this is a collective of, basically, think of it like HTML, but it's a markup language that you use on HTML or other things, so that as computers are reading through it, they can get more information. So if you can see this, just make that bigger. If you can see this, this is just kind of example text talking about some person. So this might be a profile page for Jane Doe with, this is the HTML as they would see it, which as a human you can read this and go, oh, this is her address, this is her phone number, this is her website. But a search engine doesn't know that. As it's crawling the web, it has no idea. And so what schema is it goes through and it says, why did this example totally change? Oh, there we go. So it says, all right, here's her name, Jane Doe. Here's her job title, professor. Here's her address. Here's her street address. Here is her, so on and so forth. So it's going and it's demystifying the text for the search engines. Because again, the search engine is having to guess what you're talking about. It's reading the information. And if it doesn't know what the information is, it's having to guess. So if I can make my information more credible than someone else's information and remove some of that variation in Google's eyes, suddenly I become a more trustworthy result. And I become something that Google's probably going to want to rank a little higher. Does that make sense? Okay.
Otherwise, crawlability, when we talk about crawlability, we mean a search engine's ability to come to your website and to crawl it and to basically index information. Some sites might be too heavy on coding, which makes it difficult for a search engine to get through. There might be errors in crawling, and there's some tools that we can use as SEOs to help us evaluate that information. Site speed, whenever you do a Google search, what does it say underneath, right underneath the search in terms of amount of time? Anyone?
Probably to get millions of results.
It's like, what, like 10 seconds?
No, it's like a fraction.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So site speed is definitely what we would call a ranking factor. If your site's faster, provides a better user experience, Google once again is referring its customers to that site, and they want to give the best experience for their customers. Site errors kind of go ahead.
I just have a question with that then. So if you have a bunch of, let's say, JavaScript that slows down your site, is that lowering your rank?
Not necessarily. So it's probably worth saying that our understanding of what factors play into how a website ranks are not exact, because Google won't tell us what they are. So I would say it's likely that heavy code, JavaScript, whatever, will slow down your site, and therefore Google will evaluate site speed and say, well, but this other site offers the same type of information and is faster, therefore provides a better user experience, and that they would rank their site higher than yours.
So our understanding of what Google's algorithm does is based on basically two things. What Google's told us, and they lie a lot, really.
Surprise.
And then what we've found out in tests. So people will just sit and test something, and so we can go and track a bunch of websites and see, all right, well here's the top 10 rankings for a certain query, and on average out of 100 tests, this website always loaded a fraction of a second faster than this website. So it's really correlation that we're seeing, and that's how most of SEO is, which is frustrating as an SEO person, because I can't go in and say I'm going to do X and I'm going to get Y. I have to say we're going to do X and shoot for Y, and hope that happens between 6 and 18 months from now. And so it's really a lot of guess and check. But there are things like this, like structured data, crawlability, site speed. We know that there is an impact. I don't know what the exact impact is.
Site errors, if you're returning a lot of 404s, or you have unresolved redirects, things like that, that's once again, Google refers its customers to websites, and if people are encountering those errors, it's gonna be less likely to send its customers that way. Mobile responsiveness, this is actually a really big thing, obviously, with the rise of mobile technology. I mean, does anyone in this room not have a smartphone? Okay, so you probably do a lot of browsing from your phone. So obviously, from Google's perspective, they want to send people to sites that are mobile friendly, that provide a good experience, that allow people to get the information they want or make purchases, et cetera, et cetera. content.
Well, so on that, April 23rd,
Yeah.
last year was Mobilegeddon, as it was called, because Google basically said, have your website mobile friendly by this day or else. And they didn't really say anything else. They just, left the horse head there and moved on. But after that day, it just went crazy. This because anyone that wasn't mobile optimized. So if my website wasn't, and again, I don't know how much background you guys would have in web development. Does responsive mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, if I'm not using viewports and things like that, then, and I'm just loading this huge site and this little tiny screen I'm having to zoom in 3 times, those sites they tanked relatively. So if everyone else in their vertical didn't do it, then they were probably okay. But if everyone else in my vertical had mobile friendliness, then I just ceased to exist for all intents and purposes.
Sure. Meta information. So, Jamie talked about how earlier search engines, this was really, really important. It generally is not necessarily a ranking factor, but can contribute. So, for example, there are meta keywords, which we really don't use anymore, but there's other meta information, such as meta description, alt text on your images. Once again, information or HTML coding that helps the search engine understand what it's seeing on your website, because once again, it's computers, machines crawling your website.
So on that, I just want to jump in here. So this is, so something you'll notice, actually, well, this is fine. So something you'll notice that's happened in web design is that you'll see these really huge, beautiful images or videos. Of course, I probably, I must have messed that up. I think they have one as well. You'll have these huge, beautiful images. Nope, who's the other one? Legion? I was just booking a flight and I noticed that that's not it. Well, okay, this will work well enough. So I'm a search engine. I'm reading through this, and there's not actually a lot for me here to read to understand. Top flight deals, and then all I see is these cities. And that's it. So this website isn't talking about how Allegiant Air is the cheapest, no frills flight option anywhere. So the search engine has to figure out what this is talking about. And so meta information in the era of huge design and no text is a way for search engines to try and understand that. So it kind of became irrelevant for a little while, and it's probably going to start becoming a lot more relevant again as design trends kind of force the search engine's hand.
Moving on, semantics. So for example, something that I read years ago that's kind of always stuck with me is how Google understands like concepts and words and phrases and how they're related. So for example, if I do a search for Batman, I'm going to learn about the DC Comics character and maybe related characters like the Joker and Robin, etc. I'm not going to see content about a man who is a bat, which kind of reminds me of like those little tabloids and whatnot, but that they understand what you're talking about. Last, does it provide relevant, unique information? You want to get into alchemy?
Yeah.
API.
So this whole content piece is really is in my mind the most important thing there is. So you have these technical things which are really get it done. It's not going to help you, but it will certainly hurt you. If your site is slow and if there are errors, it's going to tank you. So make sure that those are all taken care of. There's really no strategy to it. It's just do it. It's done or it's not. But content really is more of an art form than anything else. Because, again, I have to prove to a search engine that I talk about a certain thing in order for me to be a result, which is really hard as a human to figure out what exactly is the search engine looking for. And so the semantics question is really important, because if you're thinking about semantics, like Scott said, bat. If I search for a bat, do I mean a baseball bat? Do I mean a nocturnal animal? Am I looking for something else? There's a website I go to called Bring a Trailer that's titled bat. So there's all kinds of things. So it's trying to understand semantically that what you're looking for. And this is one of the reasons why Google's better, is because their semantic understanding is more often accurate than something else. But just talking about, like, let's say I want to rank, I want to show up for basketball. I can't just use when I play basketball in my driveway with a basketball hoop and a basketball, and my friends are there playing basketball with me, that is not good writing. That's not something that anyone's going to want to read. And so Google has to, one, filter that out, and two, figure out a way to show results that are highly relevant to the term basketball without someone just saying basketball 1,000 times. Does anybody have any idea how you might do that? So without saying basketball 100 times on a page, how might I understand if the page is talking about basketball?
Relevant words. I mean,
Okay.
like quotes or like sports statistics or like players or even relevant.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's in the URL, like
Okay.
basketball.com or National Basketball Association.
Yeah.
And that used to be a lot more important. That's what we'd call like an exact match domain, where if, we worked a lot with insurance agents, and so let's say there's an insurance agent in Los Angeles and it's like car insurance in Los Angeles, like that used to be a thing, that if you had an exact match domain, meaning the domain exactly matches a search, that would help you earn more traffic. That's something that really doesn't factor in anymore.
So yeah, okay. So the semantic words, you totally hit on that. One of my favorite things to do actually is just because so much of this is conjecture and just correlation, and we really have no idea what's happening, is to read Google patents, because Google files patents on all the things that they're doing, and as it turns out, you can just read the patent and figure out what they're working on and kind of back into a method on how they might be doing it. And so semantics is a big portion of that, where Google will look at the distance between certain words. So like if I'm talking about basketball and court, and they're within a certain pixel distance of each other, that improves the relevance of that page for a certain query. If I have basketball and I have court down 800 pixels below that, the relevance of those two together is a lot less. So there's some really complicated, very cool things that are going on that they're trying to do to understand it. This is something I use for clients a lot, and when I'm trying to understand why maybe a page isn't performing as well in a search result as it should. This is called Alchemy API. It's not actually an SEO tool. All it is a functionality that someone built to understand content, and they license it out to use in other applications. But I've just kind of usurped it for my own purposes. So they offer this thing that lets you enter a URL. The program goes through and it scrapes all the content off the page. I probably should have shown you this first. So this is Control 4. This is one of our clients. They do home automation. You have this business over here called Crestron. If you ever look at these panels, they're a direct competitor, so I don't like seeing that. But they do really cool home automation stuff. And you look at this, you come to this site and go, yeah, this makes sense. If I have a multi-million-dollar house and I'm spending $80,000 to automate it, I would probably expect to see a website that's like this, right? So as a user, that makes sense. As a search engine, this is actually all that I've been told on there, because search engines don't understand images. They can't understand the context like a human can, which really kind of just deflates your balloon, because so much of the time we take context, or we use context in order to figure out what's going on. So if I'm a computer, I'm looking at this is all I have to go off of. And so what it does is this is just a software that, like any other computer, is going to try and understand it. And so it doesn't work the same way Google does, but it shows me how a computer might understand a website. And so this is an entity. An entity is basically a noun, a person, place, a thing. And so it says, all right, well, touchscreen is probably a concept or an entity that this page is talking about. And I think that there's a relevance score of 89% on this, which I was floored by, because it didn't used to be like that. This was a really good selling point for me with this client and getting a new website, because it needed to say the right things rather than David Shaw, CMO, I think was like the top entity that they had there. But this is really what's more important, is the keywords. So in this example, these are some of the keywords that Alchemy thinks this page is talking about. And it's surprising that these are on there, but if you were to go put in any web page, I really should have had this figured out before, because I have no idea what this is going to turn up. Jalopnik is a blog that I like to go to. I'm just going to pull up jalopnik.com and see what the keywords are. And I'll tell you in a second why this is relevant for SEO. So I'm pulling up the keywords. In case anyone didn't know, Toyota announced today that Scion is being killed off. So today the front page of Jalopnik is relevant for these various keywords, because this is based on what the content is. This is the content that's up there. Robot car overlords is a important key phrase that this site might be relevant for. So the reason why this is important is if I don't talk about a concept, I will not show up for it. It doesn't matter how bad I want it, how much money I spend on it. If I'm not relevant, I will not show up. And so we have to try and figure out why someone else is showing up for a search query. And oftentimes it's because they've talked about something in such a way that makes them relevant for it. And so we can go and just take all of our competitors, all the people that are above me in the search result, put them in there and see what are the concepts, what are the words that they're using that are helping them get there. So that's one example of that. Does anyone have any questions about that? Is this super boring? Is this, yeah, in the back.
API Alchemy.
Yeah. Alchemy API.
Or, yeah, sorry.
Any other questions?
I think with Alchemy API, by the way, you have to go into the tools to get to that window.
Yeah, you have to do a demo.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you're probably gonna get this later, but I'm just curious how, like, when a person is creating content for their website or they're consulting for content, how you convince websites to not look like that, because that is very pleasing and like it'd be hard to say, oh, you need to put your words close together. You can't have big pictures separating things. Like, how do you approach that? Or as a content creator, how do you?
Yeah, no, it's tough. We're actually in the renegotiation process with a $500,000 a year spend client that we've been doing this with for about 3 years now. So they've spent $1 million or more on SEO. And I just went into a meeting last week and they showed me their new website and went, that's really cool. You wish you'd talked to me like 3 weeks ago because that's not going to work. And the answer is it happens. And there's no, SEO is hard throughout, because I'm constantly having to sell myself. I'm having to convince everyone to do what I'm saying to do. And it's just, you get people all across the board. Some people are just like, I will blindly believe you and do whatever you say. And other people will fight you at every single step of the process. So there's not really a good way to do it. The best thing to do is just through case study. So, okay, you want to do this? Well, here's a case study of a website that did that and lost 40% of its traffic. Or here's a website that did X and Y happened to it.
What kind of solutions do you offer then? To still look visually pleasing, but still reach all these necessary goals?
It's a good question. It's just case to case specific because sometimes I have to relent and just go, yeah, it makes sense why you're doing this. Like, because YouTube, I don't want to put a ton of content on YouTube that's not video content, right? So it depends on what I'm doing, and a lot of it's relative. So if I'm in an industry where I'm the only person trying to put HTML5 video in the background, then probably I could pull them back a little bit and say everyone else has this content. You're probably going to lose out a little bit. But if everyone else is doing it in the search results, then we can probably go a little further into that realm and be okay because the search engine will give us a little more leeway. Does that make sense?
I will say there's a huge balance because once again, Google referring its customers to websites, we'll see sites that, from a technical SEO, this on-site stuff like the content, the metadata, crawlability, site speed, etc., maybe is not as optimized as it could be, but because it provides a better experience, because site visitors are able to effectively do what they're trying to do. For example, he went to the Allegiant Air. That, from a technical standpoint, is not fantastic because there's not a lot of content that the search engine can say, I know what this is about and what it should be relevant for. But if people continue to make it to that site and are successful in booking flights, that's and this is kind of very new age-ish, and this has not necessarily been proved, but a lot of SEOs believe that like task completion is actually a ranking factor.
So we're not going to take forever long. We'll try and wrap this up so you guys can go home and go on to other things. But the reason why I'm kind of lingering on content, I have a couple other things to talk about here, is content really is the center of it all. The other thing that we'll talk about in SEO is link building. But good link building doesn't happen without content. So it all originates from there. So I have down here evergreen content. What that means is a piece of content that is always going to be useful. So this is something that I use frequently. It's called the Google Algorithm Change History. There's a group called Moz that they're a big industry expert. And basically what they do is every time Google does a major change to the algorithm, they document it here and they provide sources. So yeah, go ahead.
How do they know what is Google's code, open source? How do they know what changes they made, if they make a change or not?
Sometimes Google announces it.
And sometimes they don't, and we can evaluate based on performance that things have changed. For example, Moz actually they actually call it Mozcast. It's like this, they're kind of relating like search to weather, and like based upon changes, like wide scale changes they see in how sites rank, they'll say, hey, like it's probable that a new algorithm has been implemented, or an element of the algorithm has been updated.
And so there are updates like this one on May 9th of 2013 called the Phantom Update that Google did never acknowledge, but we know something happened there. And the truth is there's like 500 algorithm updates a year, so it's hard to know what actually is. The ones they track here are major. But the point of this is a piece of content that if I'm one of these other websites, that another blog, it becomes really interesting for me to talk about it, to reference it. If I say, there was an update on May 14th, 2014, see here, I link to it, then this is a piece of content that's going to have millions and millions of backlinks because tons of people are talking about it. So for Moz, it's a great piece of content because it's not just, I'm the best lawyer in Provo, but it's actually providing it's providing content information that people need, which really is at the heart of SEO. That's what you should think about. It's not what can I do to manipulate the search engine, it's what can I do to provide better information than anyone else.
And how can I present that information in a way that appeals to both the search engine as well as site visitors?
So this is another one, like a calculator, an auto loan calculator. This is something that's never going to change. It'll always be something people look for. So they're getting tons of organic traffic, but there are also people linking to it. So from a marketing standpoint, it's great. So there are some content pieces. I may come back to BuzzSumo a little bit, just depending on what we get to, but I want to get to offsite, which really, when you think about SEO, most people are going to think about this. They're thinking about link building, which, well, we'll just launch into this. So back when Google started, you had Sergey Brin and Larry Page were the two founders of Google. They were at Stanford, and they wrote an algorithm to determine what people might do in a certain situation. And this picture down here is kind of an example of that. This demonstrates what we call PageRank. And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to predict in any situation what's the probability that anybody would land on any given website on the web. And so what happens is if I'm working with probabilities, I have a total probability of 1, right? So I can't have more than 100% probability. And so if there are 4 websites on the internet, they each have a 25% probability that I'll go from any one website to another website. But what happens is as site A, let's say in this case, let's say this is site A. Site A gives a link to site B. Site B suddenly has a higher probability that I'm going to get a hit because it's more authoritative. There's more links pointing to it, so the probability that someone's going to visit it is much higher. And if suddenly I have not just one website, but I have 30 websites linking to it that are passing their probability, splitting their probability with me, then I suddenly am going to become more important. And so Google's algorithm was all founded on this, which is why link building or backlinks, if you get into this very much, are talked about so much. The more links I have, the more likely Google will see me as a relevant source. Does that make sense? Okay. So, oh, yes, please.
Can you stuff links?
Yes. And so if we go back, I'll just hit this real fast. Can you pull up the algorithm thing again? So there's 2 primary algorithms that Google's been dealing with lately. There's the Panda algorithm and there's the Penguin algorithm. Panda deals with cheap websites that just, wrote thin content that says nothing but for the sake of stuffing in keywords. Penguin talks about websites that are trying to manipulate backlinks. So if I build 3,000 websites and I put a link on each one of these websites that I own to my website, the Penguin part of the algorithm is trying to determine that, and it will either discount it wholly or it will penalize me and say, we don't like you, I'm actually going to push you down. And so Google is actively, and so earlier when I said, we're kind of at odds, SEO and Google, that's the reason why, is they're trying to do what they can to clear out that kind of crap and just show good stuff. Because if I'm an SEO and I'm presenting something like that algorithm update chart, because that, I would call that SEO, that's good, helpful content. That is good SEO. No one would ever doubt that. And it doesn't even matter if Google is in the picture or not. If I produce that, that becomes a piece of content that people will reference, just for the sake of referencing it, not because I'm trying to, do something inside of Google. Does that make sense? Okay. I can try again if you want me to. Okay. So, PageRank is now deprecated. Not that important because they've built all kinds of other things that try and do the same thing, but do it a lot more intelligently and a lot more effectively. But links are still hugely important. So when I'm Google, going back to the two things that I'm doing, I'm crawling the web, I'm crawling through all these links. So I'm seeing all these websites and I'm making associations with this website links to this website, website links to this website. This website talks about this thing and this website talks about this thing. So I'm seeing the links and I'm also establishing some sort of pattern of relevance between the websites. And so I guess just to move through this for the sake of time, a couple years ago there was this big to-do about how SEO is dead. And people said SEO is no more, Google's too smart for that business. And link building is dead. That's not the case. Google still heavily relies on link building. And these two things together, the offsite and there we go. Yeah, so these two things together, onsite and offsite together, are what make Google work. So SEO, when you think about it, is, there's some of these technical things that we need to do, but it goes out of that kind of scientific technical side of thing and becomes more of an art of what can I do to get people to talk about me? So what content can I create that's unique and helpful and interesting and important so that I can rank for whatever my query is? So if I'm, again, a Provo car dealership, I might want to rank for a Ford Mustang in Provo. So I need to somehow create some form of content and get people to link to that in order to become the most authoritative and relevant resource or result for that. Because that's what they're doing. For every single result that's out there, they're trying to make a determination on who's the best result.
And it's Google's policy generally that those links are natural. You talked about kind of link stuffing. You asked a question about that. Jamie elaborated on why Google would penalize a site like that. Generally, Google wants sites to acquire links because they have remarkable or exceptional content or they offer, exceptional value. For example, I was talking with Jamie about a blog post that we recently wrote. It was kind of playing off of a case study that we did for a client where we had a client that works in like self-storage, and they had a video that was really neat. And one of the things that we did to help earn more credibility for the site in the eyes of search engines is that we conducted an outreach campaign where we're reaching out to other sites saying, hey, we have this piece of content, you'll like it, it's relevant to your readers. And we actually got that piece of content on Huffington Post, and it had almost 2 million views. That's an example of a more natural link where the Huffington Post, the reporter was like, yeah, that's great. I write about this stuff all the time. Let me link back to that content in an upcoming article.
So if I'm Google and I see this piece of content on the client's website about how to secure your storage unit, let's just say that's what it talks about. Suddenly that, because of the references it's getting from HuffPo plus the social media mentions and potentially other links from other websites from people that have read it, suddenly that piece of content, I trust that content a lot and I'm willing to show it above just about everything else. And so that kind of mixture is what SEO is. I was going to pull up some examples and show you some other tactic strategies. But my main point in this is I wanted to give you all a high level of what SEO is. And hopefully I've done that. We can talk about more specifics. I wanted to get through that. Does anyone have any questions on SEO as we've talked about it thus far? Does that make sense? Okay, because there's still a lot of moving parts to it, but that's the theory of SEO. Is I'm trying to figure out what can I do to attract attention? What can I do to get people to talk about me in such a way that is, meaningful? Because again, this is easy to do if I am BMW. I release a new motto, model, the entire industry goes bananas over it. I get pictures and links and, chatter about it all day long for 3 weeks. I've just done SEO, I've done link building. I'm obviously going to be relevant, I'm going to be important. But where this becomes tricky is, how do I do this for a family attorney in Hoboken, New Jersey? And that's where it becomes a lot more difficult to do those same things. And that's really what SEO is, because if I have a brand, I'm just naturally going to have these things happen. But if I'm having to make it up, how do I do that strategically? How do I create content without it just being cheap? How do I get people to talk about me in a meaningful way? And there's lots of ways to go about doing that, and it takes a lot of time and money to do that well. But I mean, that's kind of what SEO is in about 50 minutes. I don't know, Drake. I mean, Drake's lived this. Is there anything that we should talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
No. Yeah, I guess if I could add, so that was really good, overview. I know a lot of you guys may be interested in specifics. I highly recommend you come up and talk to these guys. They can totally steer you in the way for resources, maybe different websites that'd be good to kind of get your feet wet and stuff with that.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has any specific questions, I'm happy to talk to them. But if not, we can talk to you after as well.
I'd also mention, this is kind of interesting, just this last slide, talking about how the number of new queries. So I don't know if the percentage has changed, but because we're a lot more reliant on search to help us figure things out, you talked about kind of technical searches. That's why you use Google. I mean, how often do you find, the answers to really technical search the first time? Oftentimes you're doing a search, I just bought a car, it's kind of a project, and I was looking for a very specific specification, what size is this bolt type thing, and I had to modify my search a few times in order to really get the information. And that kind of points to how, some of Google's weaknesses perhaps, but also there's so much of the web that because we have the web and we have so much information, it's changed how we search, causing us to do a lot more searches in addition to things like mobile phones, voice search, etc. But RankBrain, artificial intelligence, we attended a conference back in September, and one of the gentlemen that keynoted, he worked for Bing. He was talking about machine learning and how that factors in, and we earlier talked about how Google can't tell what an image is, but they're experimenting with machine learning in such a way that they're having algorithms successfully identify what pictures are. So it's obviously going to go a lot further than that, but they're heading in a direction where the algorithm will be better capable of kind of self-guiding and less reliant upon human inputs.
Yeah. So unless you've been in the SEO industry for a long time, you don't realize how big the SEO industry is. There's conferences and hundreds of thousands of people that work in it. It's a really big industry. There's so much that can be had there. Going back to, the money follows the masses. This is a really important thing. And regardless of what you do in your career, being able to talk marketing is always going to be a plus. And especially understanding SEO, because, there's a lot that you can do, even on the back end, that can help things outside of just content strategy. So it's really important to have kind of even a basic understanding. So if you have specific questions, we can point you in directions of things to follow, blogs to follow, things to read. But it really is, it's a pretty important thing. And I used to look at this and go, man, Google's changing things all the time. I wonder if it's going to get to a point where I'm just going to be out of a job. And then honestly, the thing that popped in my head was that movie with Tom Cruise set in the future called Minority Report. And they were walking down the concourse in a mall or something, and there was an advertisement that said, hey, John, come look at this. And I thought, well, yeah, of course. SEO is never going to go away. This is never going to disappear. This is absolutely how marketing is going to be in the future. Because, it's less traditional and billboard advertising. It's a lot more, what can I do to capture people where they are? And so, that's on the web, that's on their mobile search, that's on YouTube. People aren't watching cable anymore. So what can I do to get display advertising in front of them on Hulu? Which, again, there are components of SEO in that. So there's a lot of ways that all of this is playing together where basically marketing is all converging on itself. So you don't have traditional and digital, you don't have PR and SEO. All of these things are becoming the same because something that I do over here on a billboard impacts SEO. Like, and I'll just give you this one example. Has anyone ever seen, anybody know what Wayfair is?
They have an orange store, I believe.
Yeah. So it's a home goods store, like carpets and couches and things like that. And they've done something really interesting. In their commercials, they say, Google Wayfair my family room. And it, you know, and they show you all the pieces of furniture you can get. But the thing that they've done there in this traditional piece of advertising is they've suggested to me as a user what I should do. So I'm going to go Google Wayfair my living room. And what happens is if I have 100,000 people that go Google that phrase, suddenly Wayfair and living room equipment or living room furniture suddenly become very closely intertwined in Google's eyes and are relevant.
It comes back to that discussion about entities, that Wayfair and living room become
associated.
Entities. Exactly.
And so, you know, you have these things you can do as SEO, but that's what we spend a lot of time trying to get people out of is no, this isn't just SEO. What are you doing in all these other places? Because they all go together. There's a really cool way to do this. And rather than going down that rabbit hole, I'll let you come talk to me if you have questions about that. But unless there's any other questions, I think that's what we have.